Good morning, teens. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Elle, and this is Elle's Reptiles. This week we are starting our redoing care guides videos because it has been a while. You guys brought to my attention a few weeks ago that you would like me to start redoing those, and I was looking today to see when I actually posted some of those care guides. So those care guides were posted in 2018, so that's crazy. So we're gonna start working on that today. Today we're actually going to do a Gargoyle Gecko care guide, which I have never done a devoted Gargoyle Gecko care guide before. So yeah, I always tend to clump them up with crested geckos. I was thinking about how you probably don't want to watch a crested gecko care guide if you just got a Gargoyle Gecko. You want to watch a Gargoyle Gecko care guide. So that is what we're going to do today. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by our geckos. Make sure to stay until the end of the video to find out all about this awesome company. Let's get started. Okay, so first, just some basic info about Gargoyle Geckos. Gargoyle Geckos are from a place called New Caledonia, which is beautiful, by the way. It is so beautiful. It's so green and lush and just rainforest jungle. It's beautiful. In New Caledonia, they live in trees and they'll jump from tree to tree. They actually are from the same place that crested geckos are from, which is why I always end up lumping them together because the carrier is similar, but there are definitely some differences. Depending on where I look, some places say that these guys are crepusculars and some places say that they are nocturnal. Mine is very much nocturnal. As soon as those lights go out, she is out and hunting and running around the whole night. So they're somewhere between there. Gargoyle geckos get up to about 8 to 10 inches long, and that includes their tail, and they can live for upwards of 20 years. So they are a commitment. Make sure if you are getting a Gargoyle Gecko, you are willing to put that time and effort into this creature. These guys are not going to be the easiest creatures to find, but they are pretty easy. Reptile shows, Repticon, here we have something called the Dixie Reptile Show. Any kind of reptile show usually almost always has Gargoyle Geckos. If they have crested geckos, they usually have Gargoyle Geckos. You can go online to places like morphmarket.com, any kind of Facebook breeders, Instagram breeders. There are places to get these guys. I personally got mine from Gecko Junkie at a reptile show, and she has been fantastic. Definitely recommend them. They're so easy to work with and they're like always there to answer all your questions. They're great. At least where I live, they have been at every single reptile show that I've been to. So I think they travel kind of far up north too as well. All right, moving on to their enclosure. You want their enclosure to be taller than it is wide because again, these guys spend a lot of time up in trees. So they need room to be able to kind of jump around. This is an arboreal animal and they do have like sticky pads on their feet. So they actually can climb glass. However, Gargoyle geckos that are shedding and sometimes baby Gargoyle geckos aren't the best at sticking to the glass, so make sure you have lots of branches and vines in there as well for them to climb around on. As far as that enclosure size, you are wanting to find something that is at very least 18 by 18 by 24 inches tall, and recently that was updated to 18 by 18 by 36. I think they did that either the beginning of this year or the end of last year. They just updated that. So if you do already have an adult Gargoyle Gecko, don't panic, but you should look into getting a larger size for that gecko. Baby Gargoyle Geckos a lot of times will be happier in smaller enclosures just because it's easier for them to jump around because they are smaller and it is easier for them to find their food. So you can start them off in like a 12 by 12 by 12, 12 by 18. Something smaller depending on how big that baby is. You can set these tanks up bioactively or with artificial plants. It is completely up to you. I personally prefer bioactive enclosures because it is less maintenance on me. Bioactive enclosure is just an enclosure that has a loose substrate. It has a cleanup crew. So the cleanup crew is springtails, isopods, sometimes earthworms, and their job is to get rid of waste and to eat like mold to prevent those things from overgrowing in your tank. So they essentially clean up after your reptile, which fantastic. Also, bioactive tanks generally have real living plants in them, which is better for your tank's humidity, better for the oxygen levels in the tank, and also when the cleanup crew breaks down the waste, it actually provides nutrients for your plants. It's an entire little ecosystem in an enclosure, and I love that. You don't have to go that route though. I know that can be super intimidating. You can just do normal substrate. You still want to do a loose substrate just because it does a much better job at holding in humidity. You can do Reptisoil. You can do like an organic topsoil mixed with Reptisoil mixed with cocoa fiber. You can also do substrates by the Bio Dude. Lugardi makes a loose substrate. There are multiple different options. It's just highly recommended that you do use a loose substrate because again, it's going to hold up the humidity and you do not have to worry about your Gargoyle Gecko ingesting this substrate because they are are going to spend very little time on the ground. As adults, if it is an adult female, sometimes they'll go down to dig and lay eggs, infertile or not. Other than that, you don't really have to worry about them being on the ground very much. Or hunting. I guess they will go down and hunt as well, but they're not going to be like, I don't know, a leopard gecko that's on the ground all the time. And in that tank, you want lots of enrichment. So we already talked about the vines and branches. You also want to have a lot of plants. Again, they can be fake plants or real plants, completely up to you. Whichever one, you want to make sure there's a lot of them, and you want to make sure that you get them up on the tops of the walls. They will spend time up on the walls, so they need hiding spaces. You can do that with suction cups or zip ties or any way that you can get stuff up there. Really, just make sure that there are plants up there that they have access to hide behind. You can also do a mixture of real and fake plants. That's what I do because I am impatient. I'm too impatient to set up a bioactive tank and wait 6 months to a year for it to grow out before I put the animal in there. So a lot of times I will plant things on the bottom, plant things in pots, and then also put fake plants around the very tip top just to fill things in. So that is also definitely an option. You also want to provide some sort of floating food dish. You don't want their food dish to be on the ground. Again, they're not going to go on the ground very much. So any kind of ledges, like we sell rock ledges and mushroom ledges for geckos in our shop. You can do magnetic ledges. Ours are suction cups. You can do magnetics. There are so many different options. There are so many different options. Just make sure that it's up off the ground. Do whatever works best for your tank and your setup and your aesthetic. Just make sure you get that off the ground. You can even do multiples of these if you want to. One for food and one for water. We'll get into water a little later. And another thing that I would suggest adding in there is just some kind of actual hide. So obviously they're going to hide in the plants, they're going to hide in the leaves, but having like a hide that they can actually go into can be super helpful as well. I suggest coconut hides because they just look super natural. And my geckos seem to really like coconut hides. All 3 of them have one and they seem to like them. But you can also just go to the Dollar Tree and get like a plastic hanging orb and throw some moss in there so they can hide and it can stay kind of moist, and that's fine too. Whatever you need to do, but I just also suggest having some sort of hide in there. Cork bark is another great one because it can be really big, and a lot of times they have like round ones or like tunnel ones that they can get down into or hide behind. So many different options. Just have something in there for them to hide in. All right, so next we are going to go to lights and temperatures. So lights. First of all, they need some kind of day-night cycle. Like they need to know that it is daytime versus nighttime. Just a 12-hour, my lights are on automatic switches. They come on at 8 a.m. They go off at 8 p.m. Most of them. Just normal light bulbs for this work perfectly. You can do like room light if you're going to leave your room light on for 12 hours at a time. Go for it. Do not put them next to a window. Don't use the actual sun because the heat from that will just kind of heat up that tank, and that can be very dangerous for your gargoyle gecko. But just use any kind of light to let them know when it's daytime versus nighttime. At nighttime, all the lights need to be off. They do not need blue light. They do not need black light. They do not need red lights. They don't need any sort of lights at nighttime. Like I said, these guys are active at night, so their eyes are very adept to seeing at night. They are good at hunting at night. If you look at their eyes when those lights go off, their pupils get huge. They can see everything. They're good to go. Having lights on, no matter what color they are, it is still a light that is on. Having that on at nighttime, it can disrupt that for them. It can disrupt their sleep patterns. It can just negatively affect them. There's no reason for that light to be on at nighttime. Another way to do a day-night cycle, you can use UVB light. Gargoyle geckos do not need UVB light to live. However, most reptiles, it has been found beneficial to give them UVB light, whether they are nocturnal or diurnal or crepuscular, it doesn't matter. They have been found to overall be healthier and more active when given UVB light. So if you can give your gargoyle gecko UVB light, definitely do that. It will not hurt anything and it could be helpful. And again, you can just use it as your on-off day-night cycle light, and it just kills 2 birds with 1 stone. So you're good to go. And the last part of this little section is the temperatures. So gargoyle gecko temperatures, you're looking at around 70 degrees Fahrenheit to about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. You want them to have a little bit of a gradient. You want the top to be a little bit warmer than the bottom. This is pretty easy to accomplish because it is going to be around room temperature and heat rises. So the top is going to kind of naturally be a little warmer. If you do need to bump that top temperature up a little, using just a very small heat bulb, I think this is 75 watts. I have like a 75 watt one here. I think they make like a 50. Just a very, very small heat bulb with a dimmer switch so you can turn it down even further will help. For me personally, in the summer, I don't have to use anything. In the winter time, when it starts getting really, really cold, I like to use a heat pad. So if you've ever seen pictures of her tank, there's always a heat pad hooked up in the back of her tank, but I usually don't have it on. But I use a heat pad with a thermostat. A thermostat is so important because they're going to be laying on that heat pad. You need to make sure that it is only going up to about 78, 80 degrees. Like, it needs to be 100% certain that that tank is not getting too hot. Gargoyle geckos do not do good if their enclosure or their hotspot is too hot. And at nighttime, temperature drops are totally okay. They can go down to as low as 65. You don't really want it to get lower than that, but it going down to 65 at night, as long as it's warming back up in the day, is totally okay, totally fine. Next up, let's talk about humidity. Gargoyle geckos do best at about 50 to 70% humidity. This is going to be accomplished by spraying that tank down. To spray the tank down, you can use just like a cheap little spray bottle that you get at the dollar store, or you can use a big pump sprayer. That's what I use. Love my pump sprayer. It's fantastic. I have a 2-gallon one. I think the brand is like, this is a terrible timing. It's full. So it has this. It's like a big pump sprayer. It's huge. Oh, I'm not strong. You can just like pump it, and then this comes off, and it's like a little, so I can like put it in the tanks. Fantastic. Love this thing. The humidity is, of course, going to spike after you spray it down. It could go up to 100% after you spray it down. Super normal. It's probably going to raise at nighttime because the temperatures cool off. Just make sure that the tank is drying out some before you're spraying it again. You don't want the soil to be muddy and sopping wet and gross. That's how bacteria and mold and stuff are going to form. Even if you have a bioactive tank and you have springtails, if that soil is staying super wet all the time, the mold is going to grow faster than the springtails can eat it. So make sure that you are keeping an eye on that. But it is super important to spray that tank down. That is how your gargoyle gecko is going to get most of his or her water. They just drink the water, like the little droplets off of the leaves. They'll drink it off their faces. If water splashes on their faces, they get a lot of water that way. So make sure you are spraying that tank down at least once a day. Sometimes, depending on where you live, it might need to be twice a day. Depending on the season, it might need to be once versus twice a day. Just kind of play it by ear. Get a hygrometer to go into that tank to monitor it, especially if you just now got a gargoyle gecko for the first time and you're still getting used to those numbers. Make sure you get a hygrometer, and you can just fill your spray bottle up with just normal tap water. That is perfectly okay. I add ReptiSafe to my tap water just because when the water comes out of my faucets, it smells very heavily of chlorine, and ReptiSafe gets rid of the chlorine. However, ReptiSafe also adds calcium to the water, which is going to make so many water spots on your tanks. I am constantly battling water spots on my tanks because I add the ReptiSafe. It's just, like I said, it literally smells like chlorine, like almost bleach, like when it comes out of the faucet, and I don't want to spray that on my animals. I don't drink that. My animals don't drink that. We don't drink it. So I don't want to spray them in the face with it. But I guess take that back. They do drink it. I just add ReptiSafe to it. Tap water is generally safe for that. On to feeding these guys. Gargoyle geckos are going to eat gecko diet. Usually it's just called crested gecko diet. That is going to be their #1 main source of food, and they're also going to eat bugs. A lot of crested geckos don't like bugs. They won't eat bugs. Gargoyle geckos are the opposite. Gargoyle geckos tend to really like bugs. They love hunting them. They love it. So for gargoyle geckos, you are going to give them that food. It usually comes in a powdered form. You're just gonna dump some in a cup and mix it with water until it's like goop. I don't know, until it's like a pudding goop, little thinner than pudding, and they eat that. Make sure you are changing that out regularly. Do not leave that gecko food in there for days upon days. It will mold, and we do not want our animals eating mold. You're also going to feed them bugs once to twice a week. These can be crickets or dubia roaches or waxworms, anything like that. My gargoyle gecko absolutely loves chasing crickets. She will not eat dubia roaches, so there's that. I think she just can't see them running around because they tend to still they pause. She really loves crickets, to my dismay, and she really loves waxworms. If you just got a gargoyle gecko baby and you think that they are not eating, try giving them less. Just get a very thin layer of food on the bottom of that dish. A lot of times tiny little babies eat a very small amount, and it's going to be very hard to tell if they're actually eating or not. So giving them less is going to make you feel better because you're actually going to be able to see that some is missing if your gargoyle gecko is growing there eating. Me personally, I use Pangea gecko food. My Gargoyle Gecko's favorite is the one in the red envelope, and the one, I think it's in the purple envelope. It's Pangea. I use Zoo Med. She will literally eat any flavor of Zoo Med. She doesn't care. She loves the Zoo Med one. Reptiles is also a really good brand. I have not had luck with that one. None of my crested geckos or my Gargoyle Gecko will eat the Reptiles. Don't know why, but they are a really good brand. They're very nutritious, filled with all the correct vitamins and minerals. And Lugardi now makes a crested gecko food as well. Again, I have not tried that one, so I can't tell you how my geckos felt about that because I have no idea, but that is one that I've been seeing advertised a lot lately. Crested gecko food is super, super important because it has all of their vitamins and minerals and calcium, and it's like a balanced diet. It is important. I know they're Gargoyle Gecko, but the crested gecko food is very important for them. And as far as water, we already kind of talked about water. They're going to drink the water that you spray off of the leaves, but you can also provide like a shallow water dish in there as well. Make sure it's levitated off the ground. Levitated. Make sure it is up off the ground. In my personal experience, I've noticed that babies tend to drink out of water dishes a lot more than adults do. So if you have a baby, then I do very much suggest getting a water dish in there for them. Next up, this section's gonna be really quick. Shedding. So I already kind of went over how they don't stick very well to the glass when they are shedding because the skin is coming off and they can't stick. But other than that, there's a huge possibility that you won't know when your gecko is shedding. I've seen my Gargoyle Gecko shed maybe 4 times. And this is because they eat that shed. So a lot of times it'll be nighttime, you'll be asleep, and they will pull that shed off and consume it. Really weird thing to witness, but if your gecko is growing, they are shedding. So there's no need to worry there. It just might not be something that you ever get to see, and that's okay. And the last section is handling. So a Gargoyle Gecko for handling may be a bit more shy than a typical crested gecko for handling. Obviously, all animals are different. They all have different little personalities. This can vary greatly from animal to animal, but in general, they may be a little more shy than something like a crested gecko, which just means that you may have to work with them a little more if you want to. You don't ever have to force your animal to like being handled. That's never something that is necessary. As long as your animal is at a point where they are okay being taken out, like if there's a medical emergency, if you need to take them to the vet. As long as they're okay in that situation, that is all that they need. But if you want to be able to handle them, you may just have to work with them a little bit more to get them more used to you. If you've just brought them home, leave them alone for a little bit and then maybe just put your hand in the tank more and more so they get used to you. Keep in mind that they can lose their tails, but they actually can grow them back. It might not grow back as pretty as it normally was. Goliath has a kink in her tail. That's how it grew back. She lost it before I got her. When I bought her, she had the kink in her regrown tail, and I thought it was absolutely adorable. And yeah, that was a huge encouragement in my picking of her. But they do grow back. Just be careful with that tail. They are a prehensile tail. They will like kind of use it to wrap around to hold on, and they don't tend to drop it as easily as something like a crested gecko. But still, it is something to be aware of and something to be very careful with. That is it. That's all I have for this week's video. Hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully I covered, I don't want to say everything. I never get everything. I always forget something. But hopefully I covered a good chunk of information. If you have other pointers or tips for people that have Gargoyle geckos, make sure to leave them in the comments below because they are always so incredibly helpful. I'm so appreciative of you guys for doing that. As I said in this video is sponsored by Geckos. Awesome company that makes conversion kits for tanks, just normal plain old glass tanks that you may have laying around or you may have gotten super cheap from yard sales, which is what I do. Super easy to install. Takes 5 seconds. You put the silicone around the inner lip of the enclosure, push the acrylic door / ventilation system on, and you just let it dry. Make sure that silicone smell is gone and you have a front opening tank. This can be for so many different animals. You can turn it into a DIY project and take the top glass panel off and replace it with screens so you can do UVB and all that stuff. The possibilities here are endless. If you do have an order from iHeartGeckos.com, make sure to leave Elle's Reptiles in the How Did You Hear Best box. That way they know that you guys are coming from here. Thank you so much to iHeartGeckos for sponsoring this video. If you haven't already, please feel free to follow me on socials and like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every single time I put out a new video, which is most Sundays, and sometimes I do shorts on Wednesdays. This week's Instagram shout out is here, and this week's subscriber shout out is here. Thank you so much for liking, following, subscribing, commenting, and sharing, and all that jazz. You are the bee's knees. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. You can do I list things, or am I just went in my pocket. Oh, hello, it's me. Oh, dang, how did that move? How do you move? Well, I guess it doesn't matter. Okay, actually see less of this craziness. Okay. Especially if you just now got a crested gargoyle. Especially if you just now got a gargoyle gecko for the first time. Oh, mailman. Okay, mailman grabbing those packages. Okay. My camera's gonna die. Okay, 5 minutes. It's gonna die or I'm gonna run out of time. Ah! And it's